Chcielibyśmy pokrótce przypomnieć o trwającym.
We would like to tell you about the architectural competition within the program Mieszkanie Plus. So the competition is in progress, and I would like the architects to join this competition. Grzegorz Muszyński, the member of BGK Nieruchomości, Magdalena Wrzesień, architect and urban planner, and also Professor Hajo. So I would like to ask President Grzegorz Muszyński to take the floor. Good morning. Last month we announced the competition, architectural competition, which is dedicated to the pilot government program Mieszkanie Plus. And we hope that we'll have many architects participating in this competition, and we know that the specification, the regulations of the competition is not precisely written, that for some it is not fully comprehensible. But I would like to tell you that we did it deliberately, I mean in a sense of giving not that precise wording, because we are writing to architects and we didn't want to impose anything on them. So very important thing in it is that we are not indicating the number of square meters per different types of apartments, bedsit apartment, one-bed apartment, two-bed apartment, and we are mentioning that such apartment should have this capability of changing during the man's life. So today we need an apartment which has fewer rooms, and then we need an apartment which has bigger number of rooms, and we would like this apartment to also look nice. I mean, when we need, let's say, fewer rooms in some time, so when we have children, for example, and then when children leave our home, so then we maybe need fewer rooms in our apartments. So there are many questions regarding the energy efficiency. Of course, we would like to build our buildings which give the energy to the energy plants, but this is maybe at the level of kind of a fairy tale, which is kind of disseminated by different groups. Zero energy consumption. Maybe we can create such building, but I think this is the most expensive building that are on the market. So we count on wise solutions, because architects have this freedom and they are not bound by very precise provisions, so that they can show their creativity, their experience, or their idea. And this is a competition for young architects, for older architects. Probably older architects are more experienced, and these young architects, maybe they know that they can do that, so they have no barriers or constraints. So that is why we did not pose any requirements such as that if you would like to work for us, so you have to have some experience of 100,000, for example, built square space. So if you have a great idea, so it will be noticed. So this is not in this way that the winner takes all. So there are three positions, three distinctions, and we also would like to have that there even will be more such rewarded ideas. So we will be happy that we could have around 8, maybe 9 winners. And on the basis of these projects, we will be realizing for the first year this Mieszkanie Plus program, if these programs are developing well. So we'll be still continuing our work with those winners. So it means not one project for the entire Poland. So in accordance with this, so there will be no such rule that 1,000 schools for 1,000 university of the Polish state. So everybody who's noticed can enter into an agreement with us for designing and then implementation. So we are not saying that this is the end. Maybe in the next stage we'll have more architectural competitions, but today we count on this, that we'll have these competitors who have something brilliant to show, and basing on knowledge or talks with Mr. Professor. So we can say that we would like these projects to be created, to emerge as a result of a dialogue, social dialogue in a given place, because each city, each space is different, and there are different designs for war, so there are different designs for example, Biała Podlaska, Poland has few major cities, agglomerations, but the majority is kind of the provincial Poland, and we have to remember about it. And also, I would like to kind of give you kind of a slogan. We would like these projects to be designed for people and not for cars. Today, the majority of developers, they expect designing for cars. We expect designing for people. And we know that a car, a vehicle exists, and we have to cope with it. But mainly the designing will be for people, because people actually stress out whether they are happy with an apartment or not. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. So we encourage you to visit our website, BGK Nieruchomości. We have more information on competition. And then I would like Magdalena Wrzesień to take the floor, who is the member of the competition arbitral authority. So this competition, this contest is a pilot contest, and this is something that was expected by architects. So this is focusing on this aspect of building, developing cities, because I'm looking at it in this urban perspective, like to build a block of flats, or to give this housing development, which is the major element of city development, shaping city space, urban space. And the majority of us have many questions regarding the shape of this contest and the results of it. But what is very important, that we are not operating in a vacuum space. This is kind of a pilot activity for us, and in my understanding, we have something to refer to, because we have very good practices which were worked out in Warsaw, in Poland, generally speaking. And I'm also talking about good experience of the urban planning in interwar period in Poland. And also I'm talking about here works in the 20th and 30th. So the architects which were incorporated into the International Architecture Congress. So maybe here we have kind of referred to analogy, and the first analogy that comes to my mind is 1928 undertaking, that was the contest dedicated to architects incorporated into Congress, and the slogan for that contest was existence minimum. This is the shortened slogan of Frankfurt Congress, where all architects from all over the world, they were just thinking how to understand this minimum housing, which gives this decent and comfortable life. So I count on this, and this is my expectation, that this undertaking that now we are talking about, that is kind of emerging now, so we'll also go into this direction. I am very happy that the organizers use this contest formula. So this is kind of an invitation for discussion. It's kind of showing openness, and it allows kind of public verification, public discourse, public involvement, which will affect the shape of the final solutions. Thank you. Now, I would like to ask our guest, Professor Hajo, Neis, author of today's lecture.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this meeting, and I hope I can be a little bit helpful. I'm, of course, not from Warsaw, so I don't know a lot, but I know our field, I know architecture, I know urbanism, And we are very well known for doing lots of very experimental work, and so we can be, especially in housing, so we can be very helpful, maybe, I hope so. And I think it's very, very good, your direction. You are going back to modernism, I understand from your point. You make the point that it should be for people and not for cars, which is, of course, very important. My main point at this time, I would like to be a little bit general because I don't know too many details, because this is a very important competition. But my point is that actually in modern contemporary work and understanding of doing housing is that you have to bring together what we call the technological side together with the human side, much, much more than before. Mostly in history, at least in the 20th century, buildings were done more from the technical and from an ideological side. Now they are much more done according to what people really need, and that is a very difficult area to understand because we don't have a lot of experience with that. So what that means in detail, I can come back to later, but I think your competition is a very good first step in this huge housing need that exists in Poland. When I heard the numbers of houses that are supposed to be built until 2030, I was completely shocked because it's 1 million or more. I think there were even 2 million. I mean, that's a number that no country would even do right now, and I think that's a huge project. And everything that we can do to help to make this work is, of course, what we will try to do. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am very glad and I have this privilege to introduce our guest, Mr. Professor Hajo Neis from the group representing the idea pronounced by Mr. Alexandro, a theoretician and the guru of the modern architecture. And I hope that this lecture of Mr. Professor Hajo, who will answer our question whether we can make a good apartment, whether this good apartment could be cheap and affordable for our young dwellers, potential buyers. But I would like maybe to refer to some ideas that I would like to share with you, and I would like also to invoke this idea from our point of view. I hope that Professor Hajo Neis will share his experience with us. What is his experience? What is experience in other countries? What are the possibilities? What are needs created by the modern young societies living in a little bit different technological reality, having different customs? So I associate the housing program with a program that was initiated 100 years ago, which started kind of revolution in architecture with new no house, where we had to kind of detach from new style was actually created, new fashion, new communication means, and also it created the new mode of apartment functioning. So that affected different architecture and initiated certain revolution. Maybe some small revolution and maybe this new approach we can also hear from Mr. Professor Hajo. On my side, as the Association of the Polish Architects, I would like this program, this housing program, of these apartments affordable and available. So this program is realized in such a way that these apartments are usable, are long-lasting and beautiful, so that this legal framework for the realization of this program is identical and equal for all the participants, because only big supply of apartments for renting, apartments available, this can cause that these apartments will be affordable, will be available, will generate a mobility of people at different ages, that they will be looking for this place where the work is, where the best places are for pursuing career, and being a little bit detached from this loan chain being repaid for 40 years, and not mentioning that it could be in Swiss francs. So this idea of this affordable apartment, this is the idea that was behind actually organizing this meeting, creating some standards, and we would like these standards to be maintained so that there is no kind of a special zone of substandard housing. And we know that, as it was like in Bauhaus proposed a new quality some time ago, and up to now, this direction is also, we are also propagators of this direction, and I would like this direction actually to give us possibilities for creating good, functional, usable and comfortable architecture, and also beautiful. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to our guest, Mr. Professor.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. And I have to tell you a secret right away from the beginning, because I changed the lecture. And the reason why I changed the lecture is because I gave it yesterday 2 times. And the first one was shorter, the second one longer, but anyway, it was very similar. And I need to do something that is different today. And so the first part is going to be about urban issues. And it's, again, as was mentioned already, everything we do is very research-oriented, very experimental, and then we also build this to demonstrate this. The second part is actually what we are talking about today, mostly in this context. But there are several people who were there yesterday at the 2 lectures, so that I thought I had to first start with something totally new, so that you also get something interesting that is not already discussed. So please bear with me for the first part. It will also be interesting and probably new to you, but let me just start with that. The first part is about a book called A New Theory of Urban Design that was worked on by Alexander, myself, and 2 other people. And it is very different from what you know in terms of urban design, and you will be very surprised, because this urban design doesn't have a plan. There's no plan. But there is a system of rules. So the process creates the plan. But there's no plan at the beginning. So let me show you how that works. This is the book that was written like 20 years ago. Yesterday, I was telling also people about the 3 main phases of our work so far. And the first phase is the pattern language phase. That is the longest lasting phase, because they continue to the end. Pattern language projects are done all over the world by many different architects, and they are also being used by many different disciplines. Computer science uses these pattern languages to an incredible degree. They have more than 100 books about that. And if you go to other disciplines, lots of social sciences, or also regular science, they use this method. And we have conferences about that. So it is not only in architecture, it's actually used everywhere. And that's, of course, why it's so famous, you know. And the second phase, this one, the generative design and building processes, that is what this book is about. So I'm going to tell you something new, and let's just see how that goes. The third phase is the generative urban code. I'm not going to talk about that today because that's a more complex matter. So I'm going to focus on the generative design and building processes and sequences. No plan. So let's go to the next one here. If you want to find out about a process where you can figure out what are the systems behind the process, you have to go to all kinds of processes, not only architecture and urban design. This is, for example, the process of how a pigeon does its wing, flaps the wing, and it takes about 1 second. But you can find out how it works and you can define the rules. If you go, at least the biologists can, and if you go to solar systems and you look at a time period of 2 million years, you can see how the solar system slowly changes. Millions of years. That's a long span. But anyway, it is a change. It is a structure that changes and the form changes 2 million years. In architecture, the way we work as designers and builders, building 2 years, 3 years, that's our span that we work in. And if it's a city, well, then it takes, or neighborhood takes 20 years, 50 years. So again, the time span changes. But what is the same is that all of it is a process. And the products are only temporary appearances within that process. That's very important to understand because that changes your perspective of how you start to design and work on design. And that's how we were able to do this work. And let's go to a city. This is the city of Portland. That's where I'm teaching right now. Very young city because West Coast cities in America, they're only 150 years old, very young cities, but they grow like crazy. Look at this, 1910, 1940, 1 million changes were done, but you don't know what they are. We have to look in detail how they are. And if you think about your project, 1 million houses, 1 million units, well, they will change Poland because they will affect growth and change. And so it's very simple. It's a process that we do. And within that process, of course, we have to find out how to create this, how to shape this process so that it... Can you hear me? I don't hear you. It's okay. All right. So 1 million of these elements, buildings in this case, and 1 million houses in Poland that will affect the urban structure. So that's probably why it's called Mieszkanie Plus, because it's not only houses, but the houses or the units will affect the urban structure. It will make neighborhoods, it will shape streets, it will do all kinds of things. And that's a process, essentially. And if we go, let's go to another example. This is the urban growth process of Bath, a very famous city in England, as you know. So here you see how this started in the 17th century, just a few buildings, and then you can see here in terms of buildings, how buildings make the city. And then here in the 765, you can see already the big circles, and here crescents coming, and then this is the outcome, well, this is the plan, and this is the outcome today. So there you see how the buildings shape the urban space and make the city. So this means that the urban design and the buildings together create one large unit, and a process in which that you have to understand in order to do it well, And if you look at the city of San Francisco, where I live, you can look actually at the growth of it. You can understand historically, 1853, young city started here and then slowly moved in there. 1900 is there, 1920, wow, that's already big, and the Golden Gate Park is there, and then 1970, it's very close to what it was today. This is a picture of how that works today, but actually what is happening in detail? How does it work? That's the question here. And this is our answer to it. So this is our result of investigating how a process can be created that creates a city with buildings. The buildings and the spaces make the city. No plan. I'm not going to show you the whole book because it's very long and will take all the lecture. I'm going to show you a shorter project in the city of Portland that is only this area here, this particular area, which is the post office area at the end of the park blocks. And we can call it the Portland Urban Architecture Game. For Portland, a system of generative and performative principles and rules were established for guiding the design, building, and growth of a new urban campus. The system of operational rules covers a range of urban planning, urban design, architecture, engineering, and construction issues. Now, here you see a little example of how that was work. I show you the rules also, now just a little example. So let's say you have a building here and you propose another building. This is a little bandstand. Then the next person who builds this is step 2, has to relate to this in a way that it still follows the system of rules. So this one is okay because it still leaves that open and leaves open the path. And when you look at this next example here, that one opposite to the pavilion that goes, this is the water, that's the bay. That next person creates a little park that actually makes a connection, a meaningful connection to this pavilion. The next person creates a library right next to the park. So you see that there's no plan because you don't know what's coming next. It's always a surprise, and you make a competition each time. People can make proposals, and the best proposals will be taken for the next step. And that's how it works in very simple ways. And so if you continue with this, you can see as a next step, this is a little square, and this is an office building. This is a restaurant with a little hotel. So you create a little square, but all these shapes and forms and spaces are not determined by streets. The streets come later. Normally we make plans, everything street, 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 and then the buildings are only filled in. Here, no. Buildings first, everything else later. And that's, in essence, how it works. Now, this is the theory here. And the theory is, these are the chapters here. The first part of the theory starts with the idea of the growing whole. Growing whole means that something actually works together, like a plant grows, comes out, and it comes from nature. And that's what you have to try to achieve. If you don't achieve it, your project will not be accepted. Very, very, very harsh, but it has to be good. Quality, it's got to be quality. And the next rule is the overriding rule. The overriding rule says that your project has to actually help not the project itself, but the overall area, everything next to it. If it doesn't do that, no. Next one is, this is more, so these are the meta rules, if you want, and then we go to the 7 detailed rules of growth, and they are very functional, very solid. You know exactly what to do. The first one is piecemeal growth. Piecemeal growth means one thing after the other. You cannot do 3 buildings at the same time. Not possible, because then you would make things confused, you know. And the next one is positive urban space. If your project does not create good space, no, goes. Got to be good space. And all of us architects know what is good space. When we go into it, we know it's good space. For example, when you look at this space in the center of the city, it's too big. Not so good. But anyway, there are other reasons why it has to be kept. Then the next one is a vision. A vision means that an individual person has to make a concrete proposal, an architect, usually these are all architects, and has to come up with an idea of what should be there at this point, not just as a building, but in terms of its function, its life. If you think, for example, that a little pavilion on a little island is beautiful and everybody thinks so too, then you get the job. If not, can't get it. Structuring wholes is a little bit more complicated, but it means simply that there are certain tendencies that when you have several buildings coming together, neighborhoods come about. But how do you do that? That's the rule that tells you how to do that. And next one is rules for the layout of large buildings. This gives you instruction, step by step, how to design a building in layout. So if you have no experience, you're a young architect, you can do it. Just following that, even somebody who is a layperson can do this because it's defined one by one, but of course he needs the help of the architect, otherwise it's difficult, but you could do it. And then there are also rules about the construction that have to do more with the overall nature of quality of construction and the quality of the exterior building material, so it creates a consistent urban context. And the last one, formation of centers and field of centers, is a geometric rule. It has to do with the quality of space and material and volume. And there's a theory that Alexander has developed with 15 geometrical properties that you can apply in this. Many people have their geometric property, it's not the only one. But this is one that comes from nature. And it's working very well, and so we apply that, and that is essentially the overall setup of the book. And then, of course, there's the experiment that we did in San Francisco, and let's just look at this. So these are the rules in a short form. The book, the first half of the book is all rules. It's like a building code, but a positive one, not you can't do this, you can't do this. It tells you how to do it in order to get something done. And so you see again here the rules for urban growth, the overriding rule, piecemeal growth, the growth of larger wholes, what I just explained to you, but now all written. So the plan for the urban area is here. That's the plan. That's the instruction for the plan. You don't need a plan, you do this, then you get a plan. And rule-free visions, urban space, sub-rules, all kinds of things, layout of new buildings. This is a very short form. Each rule is like maybe 10 pages long, so it's quite something. But you can also make it in a short version. And now I show you how this happens. This is for this neighborhood in Portland. And this is what I did with my students. And we did this urban game. So each time something happens, this is done in this way. There's no plan, but the plan comes about through these activities of the different architects or different clients also. And you have to learn it because you can see there's the urban game simulation free. Well, you have to make lots of simulations before you understand what you're doing. So this one was not acceptable to me, had to be redone. So let me show you game number 5 that became acceptable to me. This is building urban game simulation number 5. So here you see somebody started with a row of trees, just a row of trees here, and that's a project. It doesn't have to be a building because you also have to think about scales. The city is not made out of big buildings only. There are big buildings, middle-sized buildings, and smaller buildings, and even very small elements. So all these are urban elements that you have to design. So you can start with something very small. And then somebody else adds something to this area, and the red ones are always a new one. I don't show everything. I put some, always what is black is old, but I actually summed it up a little bit so it gets a little quicker. And you can see the next one, and you see how slowly the urban structure emerges. No plan. So how does this work? And so you see things are happening all the time. And all the time, little competition is going on. The quality is discussed. Is the space good? Is the building good? The volume good? So it's a very interesting discussion. And the most important thing is, you don't know where it's going. You have no idea what the outcome is. It's always surprising. There's no way you can know what the final thing will be, And that is the biggest interesting part of it, of course, because if somebody does something, well, you have to think new. You wanted to do something there, but already somebody did something, and then you have to think, oh, I have to go this way because this is done. So it's very, very interesting and very surprising and a totally new kind of arrangement. And just look at a few more. There's housing in there. This is an urban campus. I'm not going to go into details of what the individual functions are, but housing is also part of it. This is, and on the right-hand side, you see always the actual move in terms of a real model and in terms of a computer model to understand at the same time how this works. And this was, for the first time, acceptable. This was good. And so this one was developed in a way that this would be the final outcome. And the plan is like, these are just some renderings. And this is the final plan. There's a park blocks in Portland, goes into this here, and then creates an urban campus for the University of Oregon. And no plan. There was no plan. So that is very important to understand. You can actually work in ways that are non-traditional, and you can get qualities that you wouldn't get otherwise, because there is an element of surprise. And if you do this as one architect, when SOM does it, it looks very the same, everything. If you do it with many architects and in this form of play, it's a totally different outcome. And that's why I wanted to just show you the way we work in terms of inventing, coming up with new kinds of ways of designing. This is a very good example how that research works. And as already mentioned, we are doing many of these research elements in order to come up with new stuff that is more interesting, more helpful, and changes, of course, also in the profession, but I mean, these things are quite normal that we do experiments and come up with new interesting stuff. It's not only the urban area that you do that, you also do it in the building. I'm just showing you an example here. You start with, this is an area that somebody selected, and he selected to go a little bit back here in order to leave this for some parking and a little park. And then he puts the volume there, and then you can see one volume should be a little bit higher, because this is an engineering school, by the way, for the university. And then you need light in certain areas, but this is the big hall, the lecture hall, so it doesn't need so much. It needs more space. It still can have windows at the outside or even on the top. And then you differentiate this. These are sketches you do. This is typical architectural work, but it follows also a sequence of how to do that. And it gets more and more differentiated. And this is then the final outcome. So these rules do not only apply to urban growth and urban structure, it applies also to building itself. And it helps at least to get a basic understanding of how to design. Once you know these two things, you can actually do urban design and building design. But it takes a long time to learn it, it's not quick. I showed this picture already yesterday, the flower opening, because when we talk about this process of design, how something comes about, the urban area and the building, it is an unfolding process. And that is an idea from nature, and this is a very simple example of showing this. I made a mistake here. Oh yeah, this is just, okay, good. So this is the first part, and you can see why I wanted to show you something new, because otherwise you get bored with me. I'm telling you each day something about patterns, and how this works and participation, and then you tell me, well, I've heard it enough, tell me something new. So I told you something new. This is for the people who have seen the other presentations already. Now I will get to the topic, to the second and more important topic that we are dealing with today more critically, and that is, can good housing be cheap? Or can, I think the title was changed towards, can proper housing be inexpensive? Which is a little different. It's not exactly the same, but it's in the same spirit. And so I'm going to look at this, and in essence, I'm going to try to first answer 5 questions that were given to me by Johanna and BJK. And these are the 5 questions. 5 questions are: 1, the threat of mass construction. Why is it tempting to sacrifice the human dimension to an efficient construction process? Well, that goes right to the heart of the matter. I mean, that's a pretty good question, So let's get into this right away. But let me first tell you all the questions. Number 2, why do we sense that good and cheap is an antagonism? Good can't be cheap. That's the assumption in this question. And the third one is, how can we design flats and living areas that are life-friendly? And in other words, that would be the standard. You were talking about the standards that you have to keep up, so that would be with regard to that question. And the next question is, how can the current competition for model housing contribute to the success of the National Housing Project? Well, a big important question right now, and that is a relevant question. And then the question number 5 is, how can we go about starting a potential pilot project in Poland that has the capacity to answer the main question, can good housing be inexpensive? So those are the 5 questions that I was given, and you are supposed to help me to answer it. I try to give some points, but that's of course something that should also be discussed by all of us, because everybody's very interested in it. This is the first question that originally was given some time ago, and then I changed it to can good housing be inexpensive, because that's a little bit different. Then you can also ask this question: can good housing be expensive? Well, people will always assume good housing is expensive. That's the most simple question to answer. And then, can proper housing be affordable? That's the question that you have in mind for today, but there are lots of other questions connected to this in different forms. And then there's a question I would ask, can good housing be alive? Well, that's about good space, feeling good, and that's a quality question. And then this is a more practical question: how good can affordable housing really be? In other words, how good can I make it with limited means, limited money? So how can this be done? So can good housing be cheap? The first, the threat of mass construction. Why is it tempting to sacrifice the human dimension to an efficient construction process? Well, of course, we all know the benefit of mass housing, because it can be produced more cheaply by the construction industry. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily good, but it's cheaper. It's what we assume. And this mass production is actually based on, you were talking about the 20s and 30s in the 20th century, when architecture was actually designed around the machine. Architect Le Corbusier told us this first: architecture is like a machine. Buildings are like ships, buildings are like cars, and that ideology is still around today to a large degree, but essentially, at least urbanism, according to this philosophy, was abandoned in about the 1950s and 1960s, because the problems with seeing the city as a machine in this form were recognized even by the people who invented it as something that doesn't work anymore. So in 1950, 1960, the idea of the machine city was finished. But the idea of the building as a machine, that's still alive today. That still continues because it's really functional and works well. The reason why in the city that was not accepted anymore because, for example, transportation was taking over so much that the city was not for the people anymore, it was for the car, is what Grzegorz mentioned already before, and that's one of the reasons why this was not working anymore. And that is part of the answer. And then the other answer in terms of people, the problem for people is with mass construction you cannot create an identity. It's very hard to make a place where people can, that is clearly for people. It's very boring, all the same, and people are not happy with it. I mean, that's what was the point from the people, and so that brings me back to my initial sentence that I said during the interview. You have to unify. You have to bring together the technical system and the human system. If you don't do this, you will not succeed, long term at least. So technical system is all what what architects do, what engineers do, what transportation planners do, what planners do. They have to deal with the technical side. And they also think they can do it for the people, but you have to include the people themselves in order to get it right. And that is actually one of the big results of our work. You have to include the people. Costs more money, it's more difficult, but maybe once you get used to it, it's not so expensive. But it's very important to do, otherwise it's very hard to succeed in bringing the two things together. A building is not just a machine for cars, a building is city is for people, and you need to bring the two together. That's the biggest lesson that we have learned from modernist cities. Well, these are some examples of how this was done when you were looking at the buildings in terms of machines. This is East Berlin, Marzahn, prefabrication, not for people, built for buildings. And this is another example that you all know. This is the Le Corbusier building in Marseille, the Habitat, which was very progressive at the time, but actually socially doesn't really work. There are many studies about that. And in order to even find out where you live, because it's like rabbit boxes, everything same, boom, 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 they all make colors there to even find where they are, where they live. So you can see this doesn't exactly work in ways that it should. And when you look at another example that I showed yesterday, this is mass housing in the Philippines, everything the same, boom, boom, boom. Very cheap, but not human. You cannot even find, well, how are you going to find your house here? This is blue, somewhere else is blue. I mean, it's obvious why this is not good space, but it's mass production, It's a reproduction of the same unit over and over and over. The second question is, can good housing be cheap? Why do we sense that good and cheap is an antagonism? Of course, good and cheap doesn't go together because good, in our sense, normally is expensive, otherwise it wouldn't be good. I mean, that's a very simple logic that makes sense to everybody. The idea that something can be inexpensive and good sounds like, well, I mean, you are telling me some dream here. You're putting some cream over my eyes or something. That's what that feels like. But there are ways of doing it. But it's a huge question how to do it. It can be done, obviously, but you have to really open your mind and look at different paths of how to do it. If you stick with one particular part that does not let you do it, well, you're done. Then you cannot proceed, and that's the end line. So you have to be very open and pursue different paths in different situations. And it is a challenge, obviously, but there's no reason why it couldn't be good and inexpensive. Can be done. But you have to look at your assumptions. And since 95% of people cannot afford something very expensive, they can't afford something very good. That's not fair. So I have to make it good also for the 90 or 95% of the people that we all are. We are not rich, can buy big houses, and so we can buy and build and rent regular houses. And for us, it should be possible to get good places in a way that we like and then we can agree. Well, there's also the inexpensive good housing and expensive bad housing. So in some ways you can say if you make a good cheap house, it's better than having a bad big house, so a bad expensive house. But that's just a little statement. So this is an example of a house in Berkeley that we built and designed, and actually we are also actually building it. We are not only designing it, we are building these things in order to test how cheap it can be. Because if you do it only with a contractor, you never know how really the cost is. You have to do it yourself, and then you can actually. We are researchers. If we don't do it like this, we can't find out the truth. You have to find out the truth about this. And so this is done with what we call the pattern language, which are patterns that create good structures. That's how they are done. And it's done also with users, so we work together, what I said, with the technical system and the human system. And it was built for less than $100,000. That's like 15, 20 years ago. And do you know what it costs today? Make a bet. $1 million. So when you build something very cheap and very good, it suddenly becomes so expensive after a few years. And then you ask yourself as an architect, why do I make all this effort? And then other people get a lot of money from it, So but it's a minor point. I'm just telling you, you can create quality in a way that suddenly these things become extremely valuable, and real estate people, they love it, There are videos from real estate people about this building. It's called the Sala building. You can see it. Just Google it, you'll find it. So, yes, you can create quality. You can make nice spaces, nice finishes, nice gardens, and it's very pleasant. You can make it cheap, but do you want to make it cheap? Maybe next time you say, I want to have my fee much higher. But we wouldn't do that, because that's not our main interest anyway. And when you look at this example of mass housing, well, that's a negative example, because it's expensive and bad. And it's done, everything is street. The houses are huge, and that's American standard, and not built the best, but it's all by square footage or square meters in our term. And they all look very similar, but they are not cheap. I mean, this is like $250,000 right there, or even more. Much, much more expensive than this one. But they are not going to get higher in their value too much, So anyway, that's a negative example about quality and being inexpensive. So how can we design flats and living areas that are life-friendly? Well, this is where we come in with this new kind of principles, because we are doing it in a way that we use essentially two principles. One is the pattern language, the other one is user participation. And together with them, we figure out what is good space for them, not only for us, for them. And then, so each one is actually customized. There's nothing really that repeats. Even if you have many apartments in one big building, no apartment is the same. These are the two main ways of how we do this, pattern language and participation of users. There are other principles that are also included, but these are the basic starting points of how to do that. And then you get something like that. Of course, there's more about construction, but the starting point are those two principles, and that's usually very successful. And let me see if I have some example here. Well, this is the pattern language that we use for that. And it doesn't mean that you just use the book. Each project has new patterns. You have to be inventive. There's no project that doesn't have some new patterns that you have to come up with, because otherwise it would be just, I'm not going to just a book and take stuff, no way I'm going to do that, So, when you do this, because the question is how we do good apartments, there's another principle that is very little used now in modern design. Everything is used, see the example of Le Corbusier, in terms of prototypes that repeat. They repeat 100 times, 200 times, 50 times. We don't do that. We work with what's called archetypes and phenotypes. So here you have two archetypes. One is the squarish apartment, the other one is the long and narrow apartment. And you have here, this is the project that I did at the University of Oregon, family student housing. And in some ways it looks similar. And I'm always using the very, very good example because you all can relate to it. When you look at your face, your face is the archetype. Your face is a phenotype, my face is a phenotype, 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 phenotype. In essence, it's all the same face, but in its direct expression, it's all different. That's the principle. That means you use this 2 times, but actually, even when you look at the arrangement of the overall building structure, this distance is different from this distance different from this one, different here again, this different here, this is long, see it's short, long. So everything is a little different, but they're built on the same archetype. It's a very interesting principle because it comes from nature, and it's the opposite, or it's different from prototype. When you go to very successful urban housing buildings with apartments, the more variation you have, the better. This is an easy way of create variation without having to make everything incredibly different, because if you use too many prototypes in one project, it costs a lot more money, And so you can actually then create something where this need for this apartment is like this, and then from this one is more like this. And so you can make changes according to the need of the family, of the people that come there. And that is a very successful process. I enjoy doing it. It takes a little more time. You have to get used to it. It's not easy to do, but as everything, you have to learn it. So that's the question, how you can actually create good layouts of apartments with users. It's done by the architects, but with the users. But based on principle. You first have to agree to the principle, then you can do it. If you agree on doing prototypes, fine, then you do prototypes, but that's a different process, So. Okay, this is the next question. How can the current competition for model housing contribute to the success of the National Housing Project? Well, that's a huge question. You know much better than me to answer that. I give you my 5 cents of worth into this. And that is, of course, and Chris is party, so he's the administrator, the boss of this operation as an architect. Of course, what you can learn, you can learn a lot. You can first of all learn, at least me, I can learn what is the current cultural situation of architects' thinking and of construction process in Poland. That would be my biggest question, because if I know that, then I know a lot how to do things. If I don't know, then I can just tell lots of stories and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's a good start with this whole process, because you need to start somewhere, and starting with the competition is certainly as good as any other process. You can learn about what kind of systems are being used. For example, I'm very interested in if somebody would come up with CLT buildings, cross-laminated timber. In America, we are now building high-rise out of wood. You heard about this, no? You know that. So questions like this would be very interesting. What is the quality, or what's the range of things that people are doing? And then there are
Of course, lots of other questions. And Gregory was talking about this before already. What are the ingredients of the criteria of the competition? Because that is there sustainability included? That's a little bit more expensive. Or is there the human aspect included in some way? We know that the standard will be included because, but at the same time, Gregory was saying it should be open up to the architect. So all of this would be interesting to see what comes out of it. So you get a range of rich information. And I think that's great. That's a wonderful thing to do. And so for me, the only question is for me how to include the human system. The rest is great, So I think you probably have some other criteria, but that's my answer because I was asked. And here are just some examples of how this can be done in prefabrication. This is a project in New York. This is obviously done one unit only, and that's prototype, and you put it up there. But that would be a quick way of doing it. It's not cheap. This is expensive. This is how it looks. It was done 3 years ago in New York. These are typical affordable buildings in America. But let me tell you, do you know what affordable means in America? Do you know? I tell you, it means you only have to pay 30% of your income in order to live in a place. Because these buildings are not affordable for low-income people. But they will be rented to regular people, and then some number, like 20%, will be given to affordable people who then only have to pay 30%. And that's the typical way. But it doesn't mean that the overbuilding is affordable. It's just they are lucky to get into it, So and it's also a way into how they do this in Canada. People have different definitions of affordable. Some city does it this way, but essentially it's cheaper housing subsidized because you don't have the income to do it, It's doing a little bit. It's not doing a lot, but it's at least doing something. That's the meaning of affordability in American housing. This is one example in Portland where I'm teaching right now. This is interesting because this tells you something about the construction system. Yesterday I was asking if anybody knows, and please don't answer if you already know it. What's the construction system of this building? What are the materials? Can you tell me? You're not supposed to answer. You were there yesterday. Oh, no, you were not. Okay, yeah, it's wood frame, of course. Because in America, you can build 2x4 up to 6 stories high. This is called a 5/1. The 1 is a masonry structure, mostly concrete, and on top of it, all of this looks like brick. Well, it's not brick. It's wooden. And very thin walls here. You know what 2x6 is? It's a very thin structure. It's like when people from Europe come to America, they look at my house, it's a wooden house. You know what they ask me? What dog house did you buy, Because they're not used to this. They look like garden houses, and so if I should put some brick on the outside of my house, then they wouldn't say this, but it's still a wooden house. So anyway, that's an example of that. Now this, all this, if it's a solar or sustainable settlement, that is not cheap. But again, this is an example in Germany, you can get social housing in that, and then it's subsidized, and you can do the same here. So this is an example of how that can be done. Now you can also have a system that is not up to standard in Poland, but it's a standard in this case in South Africa, where you build elements that's provided by the government, and the people fill it out. The people produce something by themselves. Now the question is, of course, in Poland, can you do something like this where young people who need housing, you talked about young people who need housing, where they can actually do some what we would call sweat work in America. You do some work and it's counted for getting credit for ownership or for less rent. Well, it's a path that at least I would pursue in think tank. This is another example that's more famous by Alejandro Ravena. Same thing, but Joe, my friend Joe in Cape Town did it first and Ravena did it second. So again, these 3 stories provide a base structure and then people build the rest, you know. It's at least a lot cheaper. You can afford it. If you talk about affordability, that's affordable for some people. Otherwise, they couldn't get it. So this is what they do. They fill it out with stuff and very little cost for them. They can do it in 1 year, in 2 years, even in 10 years, doesn't matter. No additional cost, other than your labor and materials, obviously. Of course, you can also do it in an extreme way. That's a project that we did in Mexicali, in Mexico, where we were working with families. They were not only designing the building with us, they were building it afterwards. And that was the only way that they could get a house. Only way. So if that's the only way, well, we do it. I mean, what's the problem? Because otherwise they're on the street, I mean, that's not a solution. So what I'm recommending is to think in different streams, what can be done for different people, because there are many different situations. And you need to explore all the options. And maybe some of the standards can be a little different from the other one. You just need to be clear about this. You know, that doesn't mean you give up high standards. It just means you make it easier for some cases to use something in a slightly different way. And that works fine. So I would think also for the Poland housing project, think in different options. Yeah, so this is how can we go about starting a potential pilot project in Poland that has the capacity to answer the main question, can good housing be inexpensive? My answer is very simple, because I know how to do this. I use the pattern language and the users' participation in a way that it works together, given a particular kind of financial way of dealing with it. And that's how I start and do it. I can do that without too much problems, because that's very standard. But I'm also interested in experimenting with new things that actually are not quite developed yet here. And that's where you have to think about some think tank that actually looks into this matter in a very rigorous way, researches it, and comes up with some new options. That would be a more experimental pilot project. The other one would be a demonstrative project that can be done as a demonstration how to do it. So those are 2 different kinds of pilot projects. Yeah, so this is the one that I would do with regard to the pattern language. The 1 and the 2 would be the experimental one, and both possibly a very good idea. This is a project that you can use as an example. This is not a neighborhood, but the process that we used here is very similar. You can easily create a neighborhood with these methods that I'm not going to go into it more deeply, but this is user participation, and this is a project that I did in Japan, and that would be done with pattern language and users, and you get low cost, high quality arrangement. So, this is my summary. Can good housing be inexpensive? I think for me the real issue is to explore what I already said before, different options on how to get housing to different segments of society. Because this national housing project is for the whole society, and there are, from what I understand, lots of young people who need housing, and they can't afford something very expensive. So you have to find out ways how to make it possible for them to get good housing. And I think that really needs to be developed in a think tank research kind of operation, because this is not an easy thing. This is not something you just can do. You have to think it through, make a report, make experiments, and find out, and then come up with at least 4 options that can be used by different segments of society. And that needs about a year of work to even figure that out, So that I think would be, if you do such a big project, you should have time for a think tank to actually figure this out in ways that it's actually really doable in different options. It doesn't have to be all done by the general contractor. There are other ways. You have to think this way, this way, this way, and this way, and then you are getting somewhere. But right now, from what I understand, we are not there, so we have to research it. We have to do it, and that's how we operate, at least in our world. And that would be my answer. In other words, can good housing be expensive? Of course, it can be inexpensive. Of course, it can be inexpensive. But we have to make it so. It's not going to be given to you on a platter, So that is the end of the second part of my lecture. We can stop here at this point and have a discussion, because I'm sure people want to talk about this. I also can show you 2 more projects if you want to see. But I don't really want to show them, because I've shown them to these people already yesterday, but I show you at least 2 of them. Is that okay? Would you like to? Please. This is Christoph Alexander. I'm sorry he can't be here anymore. He gives you his best regards, but he's very old now and is not in a position to even travel, So I'm sorry for that. Just want to show you, since I was talking about think tank, these are think tank questions that we ask all the time. What are good structures? Number 1 question. 2, what are good processes? Number 3, what are good processes that create good structures? Now I change this to housing. First question, what are good housing structures that are inexpensive and good? So I can always add something to make it our particular research question. The second question is, what are good processes that actually give me inexpensive, good housing structures? That would be the second question. So you can use this question to anything. And the third question is, what are good processes that create good structures? Or what are the processes that actually create good housing structures that are inexpensive? So that's how you can start this, because that's how we start. That's our research way. And you can see that the question of structure is less important than the question of processes. It always has to be connected to process. Because if you just think in terms of structure, that means you think in terms of commodity, in terms of product, in terms of a finished thing. If you do that, that's of course good, because you can keep up a high standard, but you will never get to other options. But processes give you many different options. You really need to understand that. It's a very critical element. Well, you have seen this before. Like this. These are a number of books in which we deal with the question of housing. I've shown you already the new theory of urban design. This is another book that I have done with Chris Alexander, but the house is an early housing book. This is houses generated by patterns. Maybe you remember the famous Previ competition in Lima, Peru, the United Nations competition that was done in 1969. And that was also, Alexander got one of the prizes, similar to the competition that you're doing right now. And then these things were built in the northern area of Lima. And that is what this book is about. Another book that deals with housing is this one, The Production of Houses. So this not only includes the design of houses, it includes the whole production. So you can actually come up with something that works. And that has to do with the project in Mexico, because only doing design for these people wouldn't help them a thing. They would get a plan, they wouldn't know what to do, they would be lost, So it had to include the whole production of houses. Of course, the pattern language itself is the book with all these patterns that provides you at least 150 patterns of how to do good housing elements, apartments, and I think there are a few more. There are a lot of other research reports that are not included here, such as my friends telling me that the grassroots housing is very interesting. That's a paper in 1973 already. And then there's another book 1 year later, People Rebuilding Berkeley. So there are lots of other research reports, but these are all books that I just want to show you, so you see that our work is being published then. in ways that it affects lots of people and other disciplines. Like I said, this book is used in almost any other discipline you can imagine, which is incredible. I mean, that's usually, let me tell you this, usually we take the information from other disciplines and use them in architecture. But writing a book that is used by all other disciplines in architecture is totally unusual. Never happened before, So highly unusual. And this is Chris Alexander's masterpiece, 2,500 pages, 4 volumes, The Nature of Order. That deals with a lot more questions of aesthetics, of growing whole, of things that, or color, I mean, all kinds of things that we are more geometrical, more have more to do with art, and but still, the social aspect is never forgotten in that. So that's what these ones are. And a lot of housing things, of course, are also in these books here. So since yesterday, this is a list of principles that we have developed over time. And in the last 2 days, we have talked about a few: the city as a growing whole, the generative and regenerative process, participation and pattern languages is the most discussed. Adaptation we discussed a little bit. Generative design and building sequences we talked about today in the urban design. And staking out the site we talked about yesterday in the project Asian in Japan. So what I'm trying to tell you is you slowly can learn all of them. Now you already have learned or heard about quite a few because they are actually a lot more than just this. And like anything else, you have to learn it, So, but we did already cover some ground, and all the red ones. I could actually ask you to write a test. I could give you a test and see if you understood it, So that's what I would do with my students. Great. Okay. So this is coming back to this one. These are the 3 main phases that we have developed over time since about 1964. Pattern languages are used since 1970, and they are continuously used in many projects. This is the second phase that deals with processes and sequences. That is quite often used now in the world. And this one I don't talk about today because it's a little more complex, but I can tell you what it's made of. It's the same. It's first the process of design and what architects do, and the second part has to do with procurement. That means what you have to do to make it even work. That has to do with laws have to be changed. It has to do with land has to be procured so you can actually build something. That has to do with mostly other people's work. But we realized in our research, if you don't deal with it, quite often you run into a dead end because there's some regulation. You can't proceed, I mean, please, So that's why the urban code has become our latest interest. And I have 2 projects that I just want to quickly show you. The first one is a project in Frankfurt that I also did with Chris Alexander. It's a project for the company Höchst. That was or still is a chemical big company, and they have their own department for housing for their workers. So this is for workers, but also other people could rent there. And it was done together with 12 other architects. My friend Wolfgang in Frankfurt was the designer, and this one was done in a way that they developed this in their office first. So this is a real architectural office development without our input. And then there were 12 architects who got an area here, an area here, and this area was for us. And so that is a way that you can easily do with another competition or with selecting people who then together can create a neighborhood, but they have to work together. It's not one designer, it's 12 designers or 15, and they together create the structure. That's a very, very understandable way of doing it, not so difficult. The problem there is really how the coordination works and how you include the people that actually live there. So even that needs to be coordinated in ways that it works. So this is the model that we built, so partially it was built already. And again, we talked about the apartments. If you look at, for example, this structure here, you can see that sometimes interesting forms are coming out in this larger organization, and then you get an apartment like this. So if you get apartments that are very interesting, they're not following the norm, that's interesting, that's good, you make something out of it. Other than that, they follow the regulation of the regular systems of two, long and narrow and thick, that I showed you already. And of course, they're also not the same. Each one is different. And we also then make construction experiments. As you can see, this is in Berkeley, because as I told you already, we are not only working as architects, we're also working as contractors. We build in order to test that this is really working, what we are doing. It's not so much because, but I enjoy building, but it's also because of the research. If you really want to find out in detail, you need to do things in detail to get it right. Otherwise, you can write some report and it doesn't mean anything. You know. This is things that are built. So this is a quite regular, standard, good project. There's a pretty high standard in terms of what the apartments are and what the urban structure is, and it's for the people in the Hearst company. The Hearst company has been sold. It's now called Aventis, to a French big company. It doesn't exist anymore. The building still exists there, but not the company. Well, you know this one. So this is this project. Later I did another project, more experimental with this one, but you can see that is a totally different thing, and I'm not going to talk about this today. It was also developed in a piecemeal approach according to the new theory of urban design and lots of housing and so on, but I'm not going to talk about this right now. But I wanted to show you now one particular apartment building in Tokyo that I designed and built with Chris. I was living 7 years in Tokyo and built lots of projects there. And it was a lot of fun. So this is the building here. This is in an old neighborhood in Tokyo, in Komagome. And when, this is not visible. There's a big street, Shinobasidori, and then you can build big buildings along. That's the Tokyo system. And then when you go inside, suddenly it becomes like a village. So it becomes very small, and it's a very interesting urban structure in Tokyo. And this is the first time I looked at the site, so it's a bunch of buildings. And but the guy was a goldsmith who owned this, and he was not poor, because Tokyo at this time was like the richest city in the world, because their land value, I think you could buy all of America with the land value. It was the total bubble of unreal value. But this is the site, and it's very well, we see in a moment that it's a very irregular site, because this is the site. Looks like this. And since we were talking about before, I was showing you in the urban design project that you use sequences. This is a sequence for a building, but I only show you the first 5. There are about 25 steps how to design this building. First, you just, because it's so irregular, you just follow the outline of the site itself. That's your first step. Then, as a next step, you also, well, you don't see this, but it's a little set in, because Japanese have little gardens in front, and they have entrance houses because they want to change their shoes. Very important for them. Don't mess it up. That's critical, you know. And also you create a courtyard, because they're south and the sun comes in here, so you have to do something that everybody gets good light. So that's how that works. And then the next step is to emphasize this particular space here, this one here, in ways that it actually becomes pronounced and actually starts even to look like a Japanese pagoda. So, but that was not intended. That was just coming out of it. But it's similar. Then you also deal with the entrance houses here. The entrance house is the entrance house. This is the door. These are tiny gardens. They're called in Japan tatami gardens, because they're the size of a tatami, which means 90 times 180 centimeters. But they make their gardens there, and that's incredible. In dense Tokyo, And this is the main entrance to the overall. This is the top 2 floors belong to the owner, and then the other apartments are rented. And when I show you this set of plans, you probably have no idea what you're looking at. So let me just show you what it is, because it's the same rule that I told you before. There's an archetype and there are lots of phenotypes. So the archetype is very simple. The archetype, let's look at this one on the first floor, is you have the entrance garden, then you have the entrance little house where you change your shoes, and then you have a dining kitchen and a toilet, bathroom, and then you have at least one tatami room. Without the tatami room, don't even start, because it's Japanese culture, and you cannot just do something Western here, so you think you can do everything, then you have to rent it to Western people. And that system is applied everywhere. Just or sometimes it's not possible to do, but it was always so. Just look at the next one here again. You have the entrance house, and then you have the tatami room, and here again, coming here, you have one more room, but here you have the tatami room. So the tatami room is the anchor of that, but it's based on an overall archetype that was determined before with the owners, with the users. And they are very popular, as you easily may understand. Just look at the way the garage structure is built. It would look a little crazy, but that's the only way you even can get them in there. And we are not building the apartment building for cars. So, and the owner was okay with this. So whatever fits in, but it doesn't have to be built on that logic. The logic is up here. The logic has to be that the apartments work together and it's for people, and so, but that's a mistake that many people do. You build a parking structure and whatever for the cars, and then whatever fits on top, that's what you do. This is the reverse way of doing things. This is a model, and this might be interesting for you because at some point, I've told you about many experiments that we do. This is a construction experiment. So we painted lots of paper and put it on the wall, and just to test if the materials are good. Now this one was supposed to be concrete. This one was supposed to be an ornament. This is a particular kind of volcanic stone, and this is the roof structure, roof tiles, and I didn't like the concrete at all. It was terrible. The ornament, who cares? I mean, it was worse. So what you learn with these experiments, you have some nice drawings, and you think it's great, and then you go there, and actually some of it is not good at all. So you really find out what not to do. And if you find out first what not to do, you already are more safe, because at least it's not terrible. There's nothing horrible going on. But then what is the good thing to do? Well, that's a little more difficult. In the end, we decided to do this actually you can't really see it, but it's a yellow terrazzo. And the yellow, very soft terrazzo on the wall is very nice. And that made it really pleasant in this neighborhood. And that really worked well. So this bad, concrete bad, yellow terrazzo good. So, but that's how you do it, in order to really come up with some new stuff, because normally we would not have thought about doing terrazzo on the wall. I mean, that's a little unusual, but actually it was the nicest thing to do. So we are architects. We have to be creative and inventive. Yeah, so those are two projects that I wanted to show you, and this is just at the end, just to see the main phases that we went through with our organization called CES, Center for Environmental Structure. And I think we have done this already. This is the answer of can good housing be inexpensive? And I think I probably have talked much too long already. So I want to thank you very much for staying with me, and I hope we can have a little more discussion and see if, or question and answers, whatever you want. So thank you very much.
Chciałbym wrócić do tego eksperymentu z grą w planowanie bez planowania. Pokazywaliśmy tam
So you showed the project that was developing without previous planning on the basis of the competition between different concepts, evolution algorithms that are used by nature in order to develop and evolve. They have something in common, that each evolutionary thread that is not checked in nature is eliminated and it is replaced by something that works better. In a sense of architecture, we cannot afford such comfort. We cannot build and then demolish something that was created. We can afford such experiments at the stage of planning, at the stage of discussion, but it also triggers certain problems. And I would like to ask you about these problems, whether if we assume that in case of nature, beauty or aesthetics is the functionality, because flower is beautiful from our point of view, but from the point of view of nature, this flower uses advanced mathematics in order to be functional, in order to maximize the light structure, to absorb the minimal amount of resource, and to proliferate and to live. And when we design buildings, especially at the stage of evolution, these criteria, evaluation, purely functional, are one of the criteria, because we have also criteria, aesthetic criteria. And I would like to ask you, what criteria were used here? What the emphasis was put on, and what was more important, was less important, and what was, first of all,
While we are trying to start a theoretical discussion there, I can assure you that this is based on the Harvard School of Architecture in the 1960s. They developed a system where they wanted to make the architecture more scientific. And Chris Alexander was one of the 3 people who actually started this at Harvard, because architecture before was not scientific at all. It was all based on the artistic feeling of architects. So this is not only based on the nature in a general sense, but it's based on mathematical models that go with it. If you go to the Chris Alexander's doctoral thesis, which I didn't mention it, but it was on the pictures there, that was based on the mathematical procedure where you actually can proceed in particular ways, and so that's the theoretical answer to that. If you talk about the practical side of it, I mean, that is we need to do a lot more real buildings of that kind in order to respond to this. There's a little bit of understanding in this model where you have 12 architects and how they do this, so you can learn a little bit there. But I think in order to answer your question, we need a little bit more experiment to do a little bit more experimental pilot projects in order to get that specific as you go. But we have extremely particular criteria for anything that was done there, and I'm not really sure if I understand which particular detail you want to know about, because the rule system, you can read it, it's like 50 pages off in the book, and everything is defined. So that's probably all I can say at this point. Anyway, but I think what we are trying to start an interesting discussion about the basis of this theory and how this works, and that's highly appreciated. So thank you very much.
It with one of the examples, the prefabricated elements of the buildings, that they are expensive. Our experience is the same, that these prefabricated materials are not cheap elements in production, and of course we have to take into account also the level of technical advancement, the climatical conditions, the standards, the norms mining in our country, and which are translated into the operational costs, and these are also the elements which relate to the approach of the energy operations or the costs of use of such apartment. And I think that these are the elements that I would like me as a member of this competition panel, so that they are taken into consideration as compared to your experience. So your opinion is very valuable for us finding the right solution which will combine the functions of quality of an apartment with the technological advancement which is available on the market, and also combined with these solutions that you were presenting. So the question is whether it could be taken into account in our competition, whether it has a chance to be included into our consideration.
I think we have the person sitting right there who is dealing with that competition more in detail. I think if I say, I haven't seen the final version of the competition. I think they're not even completely finished at this point. But I think we should look at the current version, you and I, and then see what is in there and what we might suggest that should be included in addition. I think sustainability, as you mentioned, of course, should be included. That's very, very important, but you may not have it, I'm not sure. You're trying, yeah. But I think it's worthwhile to look in detail what they actually came up with. I was a little bit involved at the beginning and made some suggestions, but Chris was saying we might be able to look it through and give our opinions what we think. So that's a very practical, important thing to stay with what's happening and try to improve it. So I completely agree with that.
Dziękuję bardzo. Ja myślę, że będzie bardzo interesująca dyskusja pokonkursowa, na którą
A competition completion, and I would like to invite Mr. Professor to our Association of Polish Architects, and then this exchange of this proposal, the suggestions after the closing of the competition will be very interesting, and this will be our winning point. Thank you very much.